Shri Gurubhyo Namah. I would like to begin by thanking Swamiji, Sadhguru and the Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundation family for showing so much love to me by getting me here every year and aiding my journey in the exploration of peace and reconciliation and various other topics as well. Today, I think I will first of all invite you all to look at this concept a little bit differently, perhaps from my eyes, because there are as many perspectives on peace as many as we all are as people. So, can I, Sham, could I have the slide? Thank you. So, when Swamiji sent out the concept note and the associated subtopics, usually, one jumps out at me immediately, and this time it was this subheading that jumped out at me, which is creating and curating peace-filled narratives, storytelling, myths, folklore, poems, ballads. And what excited me about this topic was you can basically talk about peace through popular culture, history, literature, and all the things that we have received from the past and what we are doing to express ourselves in the present as well. So that is what is exciting about talking about peace through this subtopic. So the logos you see over here are of the couple of organizations or initiatives that our kind host introduced me with. So OSTEM, which is Online Support Team for Every Mind, is an online support group for people with mental health issues and for service providers to reach out to service users. And Swari is the organization that I work with in the community of silk and wood artisans in the community of Ramnagara. And Work Able is an initiative under that to talk about livelihoods, lifestyle, culture, employment of people with physical and psychosocial disabilities. So I just want you to keep this context in mind as to where I'm coming from when you engage with some of the things that I'm saying. So I just thought about what kind of narrative should we talk about, since we're talking about peaceful narratives. So first of all, I think I'm very glad that Janani came before me and set the little bit of the psychosocial theories through which we see the mind and concepts like peace and concept of a self, of an individual, of mind, of community, of society. And two theories are there, and she shed some light about the systems theory, wherein an individual is located within a system and there is bidirectional influence, the individual on the larger system and the larger system's influence on the individual. The second thing that I just want to flag off, and we all might want to read a little bit more about, is the social categorization, social identity theory, wherein there is in-group and out-group definition. So when we identify with ourselves as part of a group, no matter what that is, it could be gender, it could be racial, it could be ethnic, when we say we and we say them, there is automatically a categorization. So the perspectives with which we can look at all the conflict can be at a social level because of this in-group, out-group bias. And it could also be because these systems in between individual and the society and family and everything, there is a conflict between this. So there could be intergenerational conflict, there could be a time lapse kind of a conflict because our perspectives and contexts are not matching, and it could be also because of identity. So I'm so glad also that the previous speaker spoke about war, and there was this interesting statistic I was looking at because of this. How many people have lost their lives between 1992, which is the year when I was born, and 2024? That's 31 years. So how many people have lost their lives because of war or insurgencies or rioting or communal conflicts? And the number that I got from a statistic was 7 lakhs. And then I looked at, just for my understanding, how many people lost their lives because of suicide between those years. I did not get a total number, but I got a number called 8 lakh per year. So that is very, very shocking to me, that we are here talking about peace and war, and we're talking about not to commit the same mistakes that we have as a collective, as a community. And we have not been able to identify the struggle and strife of an individual itself in such a long time. So when we are trying to kind of categorize problems and try to serve the needs of every group, every community, across these communities, if so many people are losing their lives because they're internally not at peace internally, then we are failing somewhere as a society. So that is one thing that I want to flag. The other is ma'am's lovely talk about the model, the structures that perpetuate peaceful governance. And I think one of the things that really shone out to me was the willingness to be transparent in all of those systems. And I think we should kind of go back, to a little bit, I mean, it might seem too nitpicky, but we should at least aspire towards a level of transparency in all our interactions, I would say. And that is also true when it comes to media. I'm not sure where we are getting our news anymore, and whether it is, one source is even enough to formulate a comprehensive idea about what's happening at a given situation at any point of time. So yes, we are learning from history. There's a lot to learn from history, but we're also part of history. We're making history. So this narrative, the present narrative, we are not really, despite having so much information, technology and everything, we are not really getting a comprehensive picture of the present itself. Despite, having friends in so many different places of the world and so many different ages and so many different communities, we are still learning to know what is happening to us right now. And of course, since yesterday we've been deliberating about, in the name of God, what all can fly, what all we can sell, what all we can promote, what all we can represent. And I think it's a very interesting notion. I don't look at it very dichotomously, as in, should we group all the religions together, say that, everybody's saying the same thing, or should we critique all the religions individually? I think we're kind of beyond that now, and we've come too far to try to make such a simplification of a concept so vast and so complex as human beings and religion, and human beings' relationship with something that is greater than, all the creation. So the creator and the creation's relationship is not something I think we should group in and talk about in a very simplistic term. And I think we're still making that mistake to a large extent, that of simplification of all of these relationships. It's a very private thing. First of all, it is very contextual, it is very subjective. How can we even say something like, okay, my God and your God, and something, what is it that you get from your God? It's something that you personally get from your God. How do we even comment about something like that? And the other thing is, there is this deliberate focus on how we appear, how we look like, how we sound like, what people might interpret if I say something. So this perception of me is more of a focus than who is actually me. What do I actually think of myself? So that kind of is also creating a lot of pressure and struggle and strife, both internally and between communities, or between groups of people who might be having a conflict. So these are some of the thoughts I had based on yesterday and today's observations that everybody has made. So what also struck me very interestingly is the symbol of the lotus. And this poem by Bharadiyar came back to my mind, where வெள்ளை தாமரை பூவில் இருந்தால் வீணை செய்யும் மொழியில் இருப்பாள் கொள்ளை இன்பம் குலவு கவிதை கூறும் பாவலர் உள்ள திருப்பாள். So Bharadiyar, this is just the first 4 lines, but Bharadiyar is talking about what is, he doesn't mention Saraswati as the goddess of knowledge in this in the whole song, but where does wisdom and knowledge reside is something is very interestingly highlighted. It's also mentioned further down in the song. It is there in the babbling of children, in the laughter of women as they banter, and it is there in saints and sages' words without deceit. So the saints and sages and the wise men of a time, when they talk fearlessly without lies, that is where wisdom lies. And it is in everything of beauty that is constructed or created. So it is in creative expression as well. And then one more, I think, very interesting thing. In selfless acts of love, there is wisdom. So I think that is a very interesting perspective that Bharatiyar is giving to us. That it's not necessarily that we are absorbing, learning, or taking a story from somewhere, but also when we are just doing things regularly and we're not really expecting anything out of it, that when we are still and when we are selfless, that is also where a lot of knowledge and wisdom is coming from. And then there was a very interesting comment by, I think, one of the people who've been analyzing Bharatiyar for a long time. How can there be learning and joy unless joy is there? Sorry, how can there be learning unless joy is there? And I think how can both of them be there without peace? So this juxtaposition of, are we living between wars? Are we living in an internal war situation? Or are we aspiring towards peace even while we are going through turmoil? I think one of the biggest giving of the field of mental health and psychology has been what people have been able to achieve during really, really difficult struggle time periods, during the war, during the Holocaust, during the famines, during times when people have gone through hell on earth. That is also where a lot of really, really valuable, meaningful, inheritance and legacies of humankind has actually been created. So I think that's an important reflection that we should have. So Lotus does stand for all of that, and Lotus is again referenced in several texts across religions. It's in Quran, it's in the Lotus Sutra, that there are importances of the symbol, and it's always about spiritual growth, striving, grace, purity, spirituality, that it is referenced in the context of. So another interesting thought that came yesterday when we were talking about myth and mithya, about whether Jagat is mithya, is an ever-changing reality. So is it just about when you change the time, place, person, location, context of a place, your reality changes? But does that mean it doesn't hold any significance? Now we as individuals do not have lifespan full of omniscience or knowledge or even access to change anything that much. So our individual or contextual mithya or myth then suddenly does hold a lot of significance. So I think we should deliberate a little bit on that. What kind of myths and legends and legacies and stories are we creating in our contemporary, neighborhoods and environments, and whether it's online environment or offline environment? And this was a very interesting workshop we did at Agastya Foundation in Kuppam, where I work sometimes with students, and we were trying to talk about why. So what they were doing is basically encouraging children from underprivileged communities to learn science. So I asked them, why science, only science? Everything else is also important. Why not social science? Why not humanities? Because that's the usual question I have, that we really do try to promote science and it's very important, but why not social sciences as well? So we had a conversation and we said, okay, fine, let's talk about coming together from different places to do science in a way that is not technically based on science. So they asked me, okay, ma'am, you're a psychologist. I said, okay, why should we study psychology, and why should we know what is psychology, and why is it important to do mind? And we did this systems model based exercises to, okay, what do you think the mind is? And these are children with no background in any scripture, any textbook, anything. School children, quite young, and they have not read. So I asked them, have you read anything about it? Most of them had not, and most of them hadn't heard also. So they came up with a theory of mind. And that was beautiful. And that was beautiful because it was very similar to the systems theory of mind. Because when they started to expand their idea of who should we include and who should we exclude, they included everybody from all times, from all species, to everything that they could comprehend. So I think that's an interesting exercise we should also deliberate on when we are sitting down to have some conversation with people we think that we might have a conflict with, or two groups, and mediating. Even some of us are playing roles where we are mediating between two groups of people having conflict. So it's not that difficult if you really group, if you just increase the parenthesis and increase the system in which you are including all of us together. Okay, that's done, okay. This is another project that I'm part of. This is Naga Oral Histories project, and this is happening in Kohima right now, in Nagaland actually. And young people from colleges are actually joining us to talk about an interview, their own family members, community members, to talk about what kind of rituals, customs, language, dress, food, folklore, comedy, etc. has been prevalent in the community but has not been documented. So why am I bringing this up here? Is because when we are talking about peace in the context of, do we remember what is peaceful, what is home for us, what gives us a sense of safety and comfort and security? There is a lot of conflict and strife going on because memories are being erased or stories are going undocumented. So I think this is a lovely initiative by the Assam Rifles Regiment to extend their, I would say, outreach to the community, to say that we are willing to engage with you and we are willing to listen to the stories, and we come from a humble space of not wanting to change your narrative. So since we're talking about peaceful narratives, I think being willing to listen deeply, and we were talking about truth telling and listening deeply yesterday, and I think this is a lovely way of doing that. And I mean, these forays will teach us how it would be to replicate this in different situations. Conflict in the Northeast, conflict in Kashmir, conflict within urban spaces, crimes against women, crimes against people with disabilities, sexual minorities, ethnic minorities. So when we sit down and when we are willing to say, talk, and the lovely part about this initiative is that they are not researchers, so they don't necessarily know how to take interviews or anything. So we have to sit down with them and explain to them basic concepts like ask open-ended questions, respect the confidentiality of the person. And I think the willingness that the students showed us itself was a very good motivation for us to continue with this project. So this is ongoing. So we would have some data by the end of September, I think. And that I'm very happy to share with. So this is, I want to talk about this because it's very interesting, and I think most of the audience members might not have heard about this form of art. Now, one side is, of course, traditional arts, Teyyam, Motam Tullal, and Dastan Goi. So these are arts which are talking about commentary, social commentary, some of them satirical, but based in storytelling, based in myth, based in legend. And this has been our, legacy in our culture and community. On this side, what you can see is basically contemporary art forms that we have seen from the West, and we have kind of indigenized it and contextualized it and used it to tell our story. So I would just mention a few. Spoken word poetry is basically poetry that you perform standing like this, and it is designed and written in a way that it is supposed to be very emotional, very dramatic, and originated from a place where, people wanted to talk about social issues but felt that there was a lot of taboo and stigma about it. So the kind of things that are there for you out there on YouTube to check out are a Jewish girl and a Muslim girl standing together and reciting poetry. This is 8 years ago, about their similarities and differences, and why nobody will actually ask them about, hey, what are the kind of things that you like which are similar? They will always point out the differences between both of them. I think which you should definitely have a look at. Another one is called My First Period. It's about a South African woman talking about the kind of social stigma that there was as soon as she hit puberty, and then she was perceived differently, and somehow that made her the target of a lot of crime and abuse by people in her own extended family or extended community. Another one is Remember How We Forgot. So that is about an artist and a violinist collaborating together and talking about bullying and childhood memories and how they grew from their initial very narrow mindsets to something that is broader. Why I talk about these poetries and these themes and these people and their backgrounds is that they use the same format in a very, very creative and individual way to talk about how they have been vulnerable, how they have been marginalized, and how their poetry has sparked off movements in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And it has aided in both the art form developing as well as documentation of crimes that have happened against them and their own people, so that it doesn't, it's not forgotten. The other thing is stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy is a double-edged sword. A lot of people don't really like stand-up comedy, get really offended very quickly. But I think that's the advantage of doing comedy. And comedy is seen as disrespectful in many, many cultures if it's not done well. But I think we have, at least the Southeast Asian countries, have a history of being able to take a laugh against ourselves. And I think it's good that it's come back and it is still there, quite strong. Many of our comics are actually pointing across things that are not being documented, again going back to the mainstream media. So they are bringing up things, bringing up lived experiences, I would say, as young people growing in this day and age, talking about peace, talking about violence, talking about discrimination, talking about feeling biased, talking about mental health, talking about a lot of things that we are not okay talking in our families about. So family as a unit, as much as we would like it to be the safe space for every family member, sometimes it's not. And it's not for the fault of the person who's being victimized all the time. So it's not necessarily the child's fault, the woman's fault, the child with the disability in comparison to the other sibling who's probably doing quite well. It's neither of their fault. So it's not one person's fault in a family. And that's what any family therapist will also tell you, that if it's a marital therapy or couples therapy or family therapy, it's never A leads to B. It's always A leads to B, leads to C, leads to A. So it's cyclical, the cause and effect relationship in any conflict. And I think that should be applicable to, some of the things that I was hearing yesterday, it had the great mistake of saying this happened and therefore this happened. No, B just followed A. A did not necessarily cause B, because there are multifactorial things that influence the second following event. So I think that should not be a mistake that we as scholars of or seekers of peace are making. We should not make that generalization. Okay, these are a few interesting images. I don't know if you can see them very clearly. First one and the last one are basically mural paintings. Okay, so mural paintings are what lasts. So the point is here to talk about artifacts that last. And I think these are replicas of original paintings. So the first one is Ardhanareshwari and the last one is the Parvati, Shiva Parvati Parinayam kind of a situation, scene. And I think the reason I'm talking about mural is because as soon as you type in mural, if you see, there's a large amount of art that is based on street graffiti or abstract paintings or biblical themes or, basically cartoons and graffitis. But this is our own indigenous wall painting art, and I think this needs to be promoted, and it needs to be promoted as a public thing. So we should see more of, not necessarily religious themes, but the art form, the particular kind of mural paintings to deliver social messages in public spaces is what I meant more. The second one is my dance teacher, Anuradha Venkatraman, who's performing Peacock Prince. That's a story about Shikhandi reimagined. So she mixes the concepts of Bharatanatyam and theatre to create reinterpretations of epic stories. So she's done Pratham Parth, which is a story of Karna, and she does the stories of Shikhandi. And I just found that, this engagement and a little bit of fusion, a little bit of coming together of disciplines is really helpful for us to engage with the same concepts of what is gender, what is right and wrong, what is birth and inheritance, what is power, what are the relationships between people who have different amounts of power, because that's what we are talking about in conflict, right? And the third one is Pickle Jar, that's started by Vasiti Hariprakash, who's an RJ. She does something called Story Akka, that's community radio basically. And she makes it more accessible for rural children to have stories that are contemporary, that give them access to news and things that are happening outside of their village and outside of the community. So I think these are good examples of narratives of peace, because as soon as you make something more aware, as soon as you expose one group with another group, at least the first thing that can happen is the stereotype can break, or the fear that a previous speaker was talking about. The fear of not knowing and what will happen if I come into contact with the different, with the other, that will have a chance of breaking. And I want to talk about therapy and social media. So there is also a lot of good that is happening on social media, which I don't think we are talking about. So there is something called Pari Network, that's People's Archives of Rural India, which is talking about a lot of stories from the communities, marginalized communities. And they are doing a good job of hiring good writers, good photographers, so that these stories are actually coming out with data, with numbers, with statistics. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, therapy. So, since Austin happened in 2020, large part of my work in therapy has been online. So, why 3-4 years? Now we are not in lockdown. Now we can have face-to-face therapy. So, why is people still continuing online therapy is a question that I would like all of you to think about. That if given a choice, if you were to go seek therapy for any issue, would it be online? Would it be offline? Would it be with a trusted person in the community, an elder, or would it be a professional? Would it be somewhere where people can see and support you, or could it be somewhere where you don't want anybody to know that you're going through something? So I feel, in my opinion, that this has made it very, very accessible. It doesn't have to it doesn't take time for you to wait for a therapist very much, or go or travel and at least avoid that cost. There are a lot of concerns which online therapy has reduced. Again, it's a narrative of peace, because that is where a person talks about what they think is the worst that has happened to them, or what is the worst that they have done. Now, it's an interesting parallel between and father is sitting right here, confession and therapy. There's a lot of weight given to catharsis, venting it out, just say what's bothering you. And then there is things that you're guilty about, ashamed about, things that you want to be forgiven by, whether or not you believe in God. But you still need that absolution, you still need that forgiveness. And modern day therapy, depending on the therapist, can facilitate this really beautifully. And therapy is not against God in any way. So it is really about the therapist, how they navigate and absorb our local cultural practices. And how do we absorb these concepts from our culture? How do we absorb concepts of theory of mind and bring it together? So I think that's also a peaceful narrative. I think sir, in yesterday's panel, the last speaker in yesterday's first half panel talked about a lot of strategies, and I think I found them interesting. But this is, a very broad categorization of that. So I think in conflict situations, unless and until we acknowledge the person who's grieving, who's in conflict, who has a complaint, unless we acknowledge the emotional harm caused to them, whether we agree on any other detail or not, if we can acknowledge the emotional harm, a large part of the work is done. Second thing is, now we're sitting down together saying, what do we need to do to address your problem? If we sit down, unless and until your goal and my goal come together, unless and until we can't expand our goal to some extent, not shrink it, not compromise. This is the opposite of that. It's expanding our goal, making it big enough so that it can fit two sides at the same time. So I think it's an interesting exercise. And intra and inter-ally exchange. So exchange is very interesting. So how often is it possible to take one person from a identity or a group or a background which is completely opposing another and pick that person up and drop them in the other group? How often is that possible? I don't know. But it would be a very, very interesting thing. And the reason I'm saying all of this is sometimes I play that role. So I work in a community where there is a dargah and there are a lot of people and they're all fans of Sufism and our music is very eclectic. And as we heard yesterday, there's A.R. Rahman, there is Yeshudas, there is MS Amma, and there's everybody together talking about similar concepts. We're talking about similar themes. So we're there in the dargah, we're working, and on the day, and now this is something I don't know how controversial it's going to get, but on the day of Ramajanmabhoomi Pratishtana Divasa, I am there, I'm wearing a veil, I'm going in an auto, and people are yelling at me, saying Jai Shri Ram. I'm like, yeah, Jai Shri Ram to you too, great, but why are you yelling at me? You know, why are you yelling at me? And on the other hand, there is complete, I have not seen as many Rama Bhaktas in Ramanagara as I saw that day. I didn't know there were so many devotees of Lord Shri Ram over there. So there is, again, coming back to the idea of how we are perceived and how do we want to portray ourselves. If you pick up a person from this community and put them in that community, you will be having an exercise in empathy is what I'm saying. How does a person from another religion, community or group feel when you isolate them and put them in some other place? And vice versa is also true. I'm just giving an example I personally had, that's it. But the other way around also, if you take a person who doesn't have much social support and if you pick them up and you give them appropriate social support, access to resources, things like that, does that person's confidence, hope, trust in other people increase? Now that's a social exercise. And we really need to try and do that in small scales and actually study the effects. And I'm sure there are several social psychology experiments which have started to do this. But in India, we need to do it, I think, way more and publicize it way more, because that would be a narrative of peace and that would be stronger than, say, me and Janani just coming here and sharing a case study with you that this happened to me or this happened to one of my clients. So we need a larger research basis, and which is why I'm associated with Project Empathy, where we can say for sure that if we introduce interventions of peace, interventions of empathy, interventions of social cohesion, then there is a marked change in the impact. There is a deliberate, clear-cut outcome in these indicators, these factors, these variables. And I think when we are able to do that, in our context, in Indian context, and in the varied Indian context that we have, I think we will be successful in creating to a large extent a peaceful narrative and documentation of what's going on. I think this is also something that he mentioned yesterday, training and education about peace and transformation. Identifying people at risk would be the first step, I would say, because there are a lot of vulnerable groups we are not including when we are talking about war and peace and reconciliation. And that is because they do not have language, access, resources, community representation in many, many spaces. Either it could be in educational institutions. Just look at a classroom and say who's not there. See who's not there. See who's not able to be there. See who's there only for the midday meal. See who's there only for the toilet. See who's there only for the scholarship, for the aid. And still, despite having all of this, who's not there? I think that's an important question, especially in educational institutions. Women, sexual minorities, any other, I would say, I have to talk about this confusion between mental illness and criminal tendencies. I think there's been misunderstanding for the longest of times. It does not mean that if you have mental illness, you have a tendency towards being a criminal. And it does not mean that if you are a criminal that you have a mental illness. I think I just want to put that statement out there. It is not as simple as that. There are variations and combinations of that. Mental health issues with awareness and with conscience of the person is a struggle, it's a strife, it's not something they have chosen to do. Criminality or criminal behavior is an action which is defined in a legal concept as to if you do these things, this is what you will do. You will be called a criminal, you will be punished according to whatever is the law of the land. So, people with physical and mental and psychosocial disabilities. Now, disability is a broader concept than illness. Illness is a set of symptoms and it's a syndrome, basically, collection of symptoms. Disability is the social handicap that is caused because of you having an illness. So this is a very common example that's given in comparison with visual impairment and psychosocial disabilities. If a person is not able to see and cannot see with their eyes, they are called visually impaired, but you call it an handicap or a disability when the society is not able to provide braille signs or the other visual aids for that person. Now, when it comes to psychosocial disabilities, either developmental disabilities like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, etc., or whether it is mental illness like schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety, and other schizoid and schizotypal disorders, the problem is how do you provide reasonable accommodation, which is what the Mental Health Act of 2017 says. Even if you want to make this venue disabled friendly and say, we welcome people with psychosocial disabilities, how do we do that? What does that involve? So I think a lot of young people are working in that space. So maybe having multiple modalities. So we have audio, visual, we need breaks. So for example, if Swamiji, if we have like an 8-hour conference and somebody with ADHD is sitting, that person will run away from you. A person will not be able to sit, even if they want to, if they are interested, if they want to sit till the very end, they are physically not able to sit through something like this. And it's not their fault. So how do we aid? So when we are thinking about peace and we are really willing to expand our ideas, I think there's more possibilities as to how we design and structure workshops. How do we include people then? So I don't have to, as a professional, stand here and talk about a person with ADHD. A person with ADHD can come here and talk about ADHD themselves. I think that's a good goal to have. I think it's good if we are trying to get representation, we should get representation. So these are things as scholars and seekers of peace, I invite you all to please think about religious spaces, think about educational spaces. How can you make them more inclusive? How can you make them more peaceful? How can you listen to the other side of the story? And for that, we'll need facilitators. We are doing that. We are doing a little bit of training of facilitators as well. These are just notes to myself, I think, which I keep giving myself whenever I'm trying to work on something as vast and difficult as peace. It's always possible to be wrong. It helps that you expand your truth. It is of no use offending anyone for the sake of an argument, so conserve your energy. Please don't enter arguments where the other person just wants to argue, nothing else. As you come across the pain of the world, it is possible to include people and broaden the application of empathy and compassion. The same empathy and compassion can be practiced very, very differently in different cultures. It shows up differently, it looks different. Peace and violence are not mutually exclusive. This is something of, I think it's a favorite of mine, I think. To talk about peace, sometimes you have to grab, sometimes you have to make a point, sometimes you have to offend people. You have to disrupt peace temporarily to get some more peace. I think that's something that I'm still exploring. It's chaotic, it's messy. And this one is also good. Peace is not a one-person suicide mission, so we need help. We don't need to necessarily do it all by ourselves till the end of our life. We don't have to do that. And when we are taking help in exchange, we need to extend kindness to other people who are also trying to make peace with themselves or with something that they're struggling with in life. As far as we know, there's nobody who's not struggling in life at all. So thank you for giving me time. Thank you, Swamiji, for a lovely opportunity and a lovely audience. It's been great deliberating this concept with you, and I continue. And I would definitely request all of you to interact a bit more. I know it's tough, it's a lot of information in a small amount of time. But please do interact with each other and build collaborations from here. So let it not just be a conversation, but action as well based on the conversations. Based on your convictions, of course, as to who you want to work with and how do you want to work with. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of work that's happening which we don't know. So let's reach out. We are across a lot of space now, and we should build those relationships. Thank you so much. Hari.